Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns. This weekend, barely beating the Utah Jazz, not even coming close to beating the Denver Nuggets, was a glaring reminder that the Suns have a lot to fix on the court and off the court. So we'll go piece by piece as the Suns attempt to salvage this season, looking at how they can do it. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing and a credentialed Suns media member. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Monday. Don't forget, Locked On Suns is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So click that follow or subscribe button. Do what thousands of other Suns fans have already done. Become an everydayer and get locked on to the Phoenix Suns right here each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $150 in bonus bets if your $5 first bet wins. All at FanDuel.com. Joining me, as always, from the wonderful West Valley, my fellow Suns credentialed media member. How are we feeling on this Monday, Ben Garcia?
I post Super Bowl. That being, it is now just basketball season. I definitely caught some sort of bug starting to come back from it. I got to tell you, Brendon, it was a great week out in New Orleans, but I got to tell you, it only made me feel more thankful to have a colleague like you. Doing all that stuff out there alone this week, it was tough. It's hard not having a partner. And so, man, it just made me more thankful to have you as my partner in crime. Not so sure how thankful you are for me, but just know all the love is here.
Well, I had to venture out to Footprint Center on Friday night without you, so no podcast because it's a Friday, and that game didn't quite rise to the level. I think even the win might have made us we might not have been positive enough even if we did, unfortunately.
Can I tell you something funny? That Friday night game, so I had to go back and rewatch a lot of it because I thought, it might come up in this. I fell asleep from noon. My flight got in at 10. I fell asleep at noon, woke up at 7, somewhere around there. Super late. Fell back asleep again. Woke up just in time to see Grayson Allen's shot and overtime. That is all I saw live.
You saw
so it was I did see the good part.
All right, so 135-127 overtime win over Utah on Friday, 122-105 loss to Denver on Saturday in this home back-to-back. Both games without Beal or Durant. Saturday without the hero of Friday's game, Grayson Allen, and just a different sort of rotation than we have gotten to see. So there was a little bit of intrigue there. But, Ben, I think what we really have to try to answer here, because neither of these results are acceptable, in my opinion. I mean, I understand the injuries and whatever, but you should be able to beat the Jazz comfortably, to me, even without your best players, because guess what? The Jazz are also without some of their best players. They're the Jazz. They're not as good of a team. And Denver, okay, you're probably going to lose that game, but it was never competitive. They also were without MPJ, and, Peyton Watson's hurt and everything. It's that time of year. You should be competitive in games. I think that's the bare minimum standard. You shouldn't be squeaking by the Jazz and getting demolished by the Nuggets no matter what. And so that type of result has just become too familiar, where I think Suns fans probably know when those games are coming up and you see the injury report, whatever, right? And it shouldn't be like that. So what I think the question we need to answer here is we'll get into the big ESPN article that kind of broke down the trade deadline and kind of do the off-the-court fixes that I think this franchise is also needing to confront. But on the court, this is still a season where missing the play-in would be a catastrophe. You ideally would like to, at least in any kind of world, build on what you did last season in some way, shape, or form. Not to mention have the winning be part of what fixes the off-court stuff a little bit, make everybody at least feel better. So what do you look at with this team, big picture, that has to happen for the Suns to get back on track and make these games more competitive and get some, a little bit of leeway in the standings and maybe host the play-in game instead of being on the road? we can't just toss this season down the drain. So what are you looking at?
Well, we can't toss the season down the drain because what are you tanking for then? Like other teams,
No,
when
no, of course.
no, that's what I'm saying. But like you can't as a fan, if you're rooting for this team to lose, what are you rooting for? You're not rooting for ping pong balls. You're not rooting for a better draft pick. So the only other thing to do is to win games. I think for me, Brendon, it's just I got to see these guys figure out a way to play with each other because it feels like it's still the first game of the season where they don't know where the ball's going. Everything has turned at some point. It's an internal issue. Like we were all really excited to see Tyus Jones go from the Wizards and the Grizzlies to over to the Suns. Like, why did he play so well with those other two teams? Even with the Grizzlies, even some of his defensive deficiencies, here it seems like the guy doesn't know how to play basketball. Like at some point, it's an internal issue here where Booker and Tyus, and maybe it's because they're not on the court, all those guys together at the same time because of injuries. But I got to see them play better together. And when teams get down on them, like I thought last night, the Suns couldn't have played much better for what they were given, which was Ty Washington and a lot of Bol. I actually thought they played pretty decently, but they still got demolished because when this team defensively just got beat to shreds against Jokic and Jamal Murray, who was great last night too, who didn't have some of their star players either, but they know how to play with each other. The Suns just simply do not. We have to figure out some sort of momentum to get this into the playoffs and then, potentially just to play in so that in the offseason, it doesn't feel like you are forced to blow it up, even though you might have to do that. So that's kind of where I got with it, man. What about you?
So you want to see what change or what area do they need to get better?
The biggest thing is, I think the biggest thing is defensively. They have to turn this around defensively. That is the worst part of the Suns. Like, I think it's actually pretty impressive that they nearly score 110 points last night. I understand 5 points is still decently short of that, but with Bol and Devin Booker, who wasn't great last night because he was probably so gassed from the night before, but no Grayson, no Brad, no Kevin Durant. Those are your three of your top four scorers, it feels like, on this team. Maybe top five scorers if you want to count Tyus or Royce O'Neal given whatever night. But defensively, this team, man, it just goes to show you, and I told you this on Friday, even if they made it to the playoffs, they won a bunch of games, they became the 6th seed, I just feel like whoever they played, they would get suffocated defensively, and then other teams would have their way with them defensively. I don't know how you get that better. You mentioned this, Frank Vogel might actually deserve some flowers from what he was able to pull off last year, because this year, I don't even know if it's a deficiency schematic wise. I think it might just be a talent deficiency because they can't rotate at all. Jokic last night was toying with them, and especially the worst, even more so, not even just that the deficiencies in terms of talent. I think it just might even be like, I'm sorry, not deficiencies from schematics wise defensively. I think it just might be a talent issue with this team. So, and then the biggest thing as well is the transition defense. Jokic was having their way with them last night. So if we're getting into exact specifics, that would be it for me. Offensively, I know that they can play at least a little bit better defensively. I'm worried that they might not be able to, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I've had to remind myself, and we've talked about it on the show plenty of times, when you kind of want to beat up the offensive execution and things like that, to always kind of remind myself that the fundamental problem is the defense. Like you look at it this year, Brad, Book, and KD on the court together, it's not where you would want it to be offensively, but it's 118.4 offensive rating. That would still be like toward the top of the entire NBA if that was the whole team's offensive rating. When those three guys are out there, it's still pretty decent. The problem is their defense is abominable when those three guys are out there, because that's when you start to get into the fit issues and you're not able to have as many defensive specialists on the court and things like that. And all that stuff starts to come into play. So I really think it is the defense. Last year, the Suns had the 12th ranked defense in the NBA. This year, it is 27th. They're the bottom 5 defense. I mean, like that, you can't, there's really not a lot further you can go beyond that when your team is 27th in defense. I mean, it's like the issue if you think of other teams that maybe get us out of Suns land a little bit, like the Hawks in recent seasons, or I don't even know, just the Hornets or something like that, where at various points they've blipped into, hey, that's interesting. That's a top 10 offense because they have Trae Young and they have Bogdanovich, and Clint Capella gobbles up offensive rebounds. LaMelo Ball's pretty cool. Miles Bridges can put in buckets, but their defense is so bad they're not even a factor in the NBA. They're not even a team we care about. That's sort of what the Suns are right now. And if you even break it down, they're 24th in defense since Nick Richards debuted, and they're 21st since they benched Yusuf Nurkic. So it's not even like, oh, they're just being, watered down from how bad they were at the beginning of the season, but it's turned around. No, it really hasn't turned around. It's still, even if you want to say bottom 10 since they benched Nurkic, you're not going anywhere with that. So it is a defensive issue, and it is we talk about it like the possession game in terms of the Suns giving away the ball too often a lot of the time, Ben. Like, they turn it over. The team isn't a very good offensive rebounding team. They, in past seasons, they didn't get to the free throw line enough, things like that. It's also a possession problem on the defensive end. They don't create turnovers at all. Now, Mike Budenholzer teams historically don't go crazy to try to sell out to get turnovers, but the Suns are 28th in that category. They're bottom 3 in creating turnovers, and they obviously don't. They're not a very good defensive rebounding team either. I mean, they're a little better there than offensive sometimes, but whatever way you slice it, they just lose the possession battle every single night. And so you combine that with everything else we talk about, and that is how you stack the decks against a team with this much talent, is you lose the small stuff every single night, and they still do that.
I think also offensively, if we're just going to harp on turnovers really quickly, I thought it was really telling, and I'm not blaming Kevin Durant, and I'm not blaming Bradley Beal. I'm not putting this on anyone in particular. If anything, I'm pointing the finger a little bit at Coach Budenholzer. The Suns had 6 turnovers, I believe, on Friday night against the Jazz, and then last night, if I'm not mistaken, they had 7, or I have those two flip-flopped. How the ball doesn't move better with 3 stars or whatever, 2.5 stars on the court at the same time is kind of beyond me, because if the Suns had a bottom 5 defense and a top 5 offense, I could buy that. But the fact that defensively they're bottom 5 and offensively they're not one of the best teams in the NBA and they give away the ball a lot, those are two things for me, transition defense and turning over the ball offensively, that I have to see better. But I'm starting to lose confidence in if they will ever do that. And I think it's really telling that without his stars in the games, they're not turning over the ball as much. So
yeah, I mean, the transition defense thing has always been like a little bit of a chicken and egg, right? Because some teams' transition defense is off of makes and misses because they're really clean with their turnovers. So if you can practice your transition defense when you miss a 3, that's a lot different than when you just give the ball away and the other team sprinting down the court. And all those possessions get lumped together when you're talking about transition defense, when you're looking at stats or anything else. The Suns it's impossible to have a good transition defense when you turn it over as much as they do, because all the things we're counting as transition defensive possessions, they're all just fast breaks, basically, just gimmies. Mm-hmm. So it's all connected, of course. But all right, there's on the court. Let's go off the court. Ramona Shelburne and Brian Windhorst published a long, thorough article breaking down everything that happened between the Warriors, the Heat, and the Suns up through the NBA trade deadline last Friday. But we are back here to give you everything you need to know from it, and ideally try to find a way forward for the Suns after a series of big mistakes. We'll get there next. First, today's show is brought to you by Skims. When we found out Skims was making underwear for men, all of us here on the Locked On Podcast Network a little intrigued. We've heard so much about their quality over the years, and we've seen the NBA. Okay, there's some dudes who are out there selling it. What's the deal here? What's really the quality? But look, I can tell you, it is excellent. The boxer brief, they have a bunch of different versions. I believe they also have more of a regular boxer style, if I'm not mistaken. They also have the smaller briefs, if that's you. A bunch of different things for every single person. And when they say they're perfect for the active lifestyle, they mean it. It really is the closest thing I've worn where it feels like a compression short or something like that in terms of the softness and the flexibility, but it is, the thick and the material you really want for every day. It's kind of that happy medium, that middle ground that is perfect. So shop Skims Men's. Try it out for yourself at skims.com and Skims stores. Let them know we sent you by selecting podcast in the survey after you purchase, and then select our show in the drop-down menu that comes after. And if you're looking for the perfect gift for your Valentine or for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, kids, and even pets. All right, Ben, let's keep it rolling here. Don't forget to sign up for the Locked On Suns daily newsletter if you have not already at LockedOnDaily.com. Great content, free for you, supports us big time. Okay, so this ESPN article, Ben, I think it can kind of be our guide for the rest of the show. I'll give the basic details on the KD side of it because I think that's the biggest issue the Suns have to confront coming off of how wrong things went during deadline week. It sounds like the Suns and Warriors were talking as early as Monday, Tuesday, the week of January 27th. So that's now 2 weeks ago, the week before deadline week. It sounds as if Durant and his manager, Rich Kleiman, found out about all of that. Likely, if you read between the lines from people with the Warriors, when the Suns visited Chase Center on January 31st, they won that game. So there you go. A little bit of silver lining. And then let's start there. There's a quote from somebody in the article later after that timeline has been set up, Ben, where they said, somebody from the Suns, we should have gone through Rich Kleiman. Duh. What an idea. You probably should have talked to the person and the person's agent when you were talking about potentially trading them when they're a Hall of Fame caliber player who you really don't want to bother. And by the way, if you don't trade them, you want to sign them to an extension in the summer. What happened? Whose great idea was it to skip over the people involved in the talks during the talks? It's crazy.
If we're doing process of elimination, I don't think James Jones would do that. I think James Jones, being a former player, would understand that dudes would like to be talked to. I don't know how much Ishbia would do that. I think it points to Josh Bartelstein, man. A guy who thought, his dad is one of the powerhouse agents of the NBA. Maybe he thought he could get around everyone without anyone knowing. But, forget
It was a little bit of a rhetorical question. I mean, we can't know, right? But
yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Forget who it was. No, I was going to say forget. I was going to say forget who it was. I was just quickly answering your rhetorical question, but it's more like, how stupid do you have to be? It just felt like the Suns were going around and round in circles. I get originally not saying something to Kevin Durant if this was like a surprise thing that maybe Dunleavy and James Jones just quickly talked about, and then immediately James Jones stopped and said, listen, I got to talk to KD before I do any of this. What is so wrong about this is, and I think what would piss Kevin Durant off the most is the fact it's the team that he left because he was it was kind of a fractured relationship towards the end of it. Him and Draymond didn't get along. He was ready to move on. So the fact that you were about to trade him potentially back to the Golden State Warriors, whether you were going to talk to him or not, before trading him officially to them, that would piss me off, especially when Kevin Durant did choose you to come over there. Now, when it comes to Nurkic and things like that, I'm like, boo-hoo, man. But you can't miss this stuff with Kevin Durant or star players on this team. If you're asking me this too, man, I don't know, because Kevin Durant, I do think, has rabbit ears. This is a little bit more of a sensitive guy. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Whenever people say sensitive, people tend to think it's a bad thing. Being a little bit more sensitive is not a bad thing. It is who he is.
Aware.
Yeah, a little bit more aware of the things.
It sounds like you're being a baby.
Yeah,
aware.
yeah.
He notices
Even though it shouldn't be, That is what it is.
No, I
and
agree
the
with
fact
you.
that
the
Suns,
definition of the word is totally fine, and that's what he is. He picks up on this stuff. He's going to hear
that's
it through
okay.
the grapevine. He's on Twitter. He's talking to people. That's just what you're dealing with. So I agree, it's relevant here.
Do you think that relationship can be salvaged? Like, that's kind of where I was at. Because
we talked about it last week, and you made me feel like I was an idiot for thinking it might not be able to be. You went,
well, that was before. That was before I read this. That was before I read the article, and I
think we kind of knew that it was that it blindsided him by the time we talked last week. This is just like more egregious. So I feel the same way I did back then, which is, I'm really skeptical, and I think that's why I kind of started on the court, is because it's not just a cliche. Winning does cure everything. If this team can get its act together or anything, and look, I'm not trying to be naive, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but obviously that would help. If they can't, if the season continues in this direction and they're 41-41 and they go to like San Antonio for the 10-9 game and they just get their you-know-what's beaten by Victor Wembanyama on some Thursday in the first week of April in the play-in, I don't see how this gets salvaged, because you should have been handling this from the point of view, we failed Durant and Booker, building this team around them. This season is on us in large part because we have surrounded them with imperfect parts, inconsistently available players. We've been jumpy and whack-a-mole with how we've approached this. And so therefore, we need to be proving to those two guys to stick with us. And somehow they've managed to turn the tables and make him feel like he was somehow like a burden. Like, God, we got this KD thing to deal with. It's like, what? Well, having Kevin Durant on your team is you know what I mean? Like, I get the contract situation and all that stuff, but it sounds like from this article, what Shams has said, no one is pushing back on the idea that KD wanted and still wants to be here, and that all of this largely caught him off guard. Yes, it sounds like maybe the timeline was a little sooner than what we were led to believe, but the idea of it is still the Suns listened to the Warriors on this and kept KD in the dark, and maybe even he found out about it from the Warriors. Like, that's inexcusable, and it might genuinely cut through deep enough that it can't be fixed.
I think I would assume, just from reading the article, I think he found it out through Steph Curry. I think Curry assumed he knew, texted Kevin about it, and Kevin was like, what are you talking about? So the fact that they didn't go through his agent, I just don't understand, because you can't trade Kevin Durant without the other team knowing that Kevin Durant will sign an extension with them in the offseason. So I don't really know where this idea was coming from. I think this was the biggest fumble. Like, I didn't know all these things. Don't know if you know this, Brendon. I was a little busy last week along with everyone else. So when I see the article and I read that it truly was, they never talked to him, I mean, it was mind blown. They also didn't talk to Bradley Beal. That's a whole nother story, but they didn't put any of these fires out. In fact, they threw gasoline on all of them. So it's almost like they were, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but I saw Kevin Durant's take last week on the Luka Doncic thing, where he was like, everyone talks about loyalty.
Yeah,
I would love to know who Kevin Durant.
It was the Tuesday night episode with you last week, that Wednesday show for people who listen and watch, where I said, don't forget what he said. That was not an accident. Not an accident. Now we know he knew about this when he said that. So, like, again, I told you before, I don't speak Bud, but when he goes, then I know he's lying about Nurkic. I don't fully speak Kevin Durant, but guys don't just give you a big, monologue about the state of player-team relations in the NBA on accident.
I agree with you. I think he was 100% subtweeting out loud the Phoenix Suns. Why would you say that? Because, which is why I never get upset with players when they demand trades. Now, I can get upset how they do it or whatever, but, I think loyalty is largely overrated outside to your spouse and to your family. I think you got to take care of yourself, and I think you should do that. The Kevin Durant thing, when he said that, now it is very telling. Seeing exactly how this went down, because everyone went after Kevin Durant when he demanded one trade. He only demanded it once from the Brooklyn Nets, and he went to the Golden State Warriors. Everyone assumes he just demanded it and started this player movement. That wasn't him, but like people got upset with him, but no one has really said anything outside of local media of like, what are the Phoenix Suns doing? And I understand how that would frustrate him.
Yeah. It sounds like the trade package was, this last part of it is, I think the way I'd put it is it reeks of even more desperation than anything else.
Yep.
The idea of Butler coming back for Durant. There's no version of that where you could convince me the team is better. And then if you look at what else they would have been getting, it would have been Kuminga, Valanciunas, and a couple of first-round picks. Like, you either are all in or you're resetting. But this half measure, you're talking about a worse team. And so that honestly is just another element of, I think, what I said last week, which is still just the best way I would put it. This is a lack of vision. This is what happens when a president who's new on the job and an owner who is a little bit over his skis think that they can wheel and deal their way through every little problem that comes up, when it's not exactly a secret that we're talking about this on Super Bowl day, Ben. The Chiefs' brain trust, the Eagles' brain trust, these teams that win in every sport. You can go last year, who won the finals. It's Brad Stevens, who's been there for a decade. The other team that they, played, I thought Nico Harrison did a pretty good job as GM up until this disaster. It's about stability and building and whatever. This is proof that the Suns' pathway here has run up against an absolute brick wall. It can't continue this way.
Just really quickly, would you have taken that deal? Kuminga, Butler, the picks,
No.
Would you have taken that deal? And
Absolutely
why would
not.
you? And why wouldn't you have taken that deal? I know why you wouldn't have taken that deal, but explain why you wouldn't have.
Because of what I just said. You either are continuing to be all in, and maybe we can bicker about if Butler for Beal would make the team substantially better. We obviously talked about that plenty, but that makes sense. You're continuing to be all in, or you're resetting things, preferably around the youngest star you still have, Devin Booker, but obviously we know potentially not even with him. Continuing to be in the middle of that is exactly where they are now, and they would have had the same exact problems.
And you would have had to pay Butler $50 million, and you would have had to pay Kuminga a bunch of money, or you lose them. So it was this. That was on paper. You're like, oh, but when you do 2 minutes of thinking about it, you're like, this is a horrible deal. I could do better than this in the offseason. So yeah. Anyways,
okay. So let's talk about the Beal element of this, because it honestly feels like if the bridge has been burned with Durant and we are headed, unfortunately, toward trade talks, everything this summer, Bradley Beal doesn't appear to be going anywhere. So what can we learn from that situation going forward next? First, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets in a same-game parlay. Let's check it out. Can't give you live bets on a pre-recorded podcast, unfortunately. You know how that stuff works, but I can tell you that on Monday, we have some big favorites in the world of college basketball to get those bonus bets going. That is Nevada hosting Fresno State. Bet $150 or get $150 at FanDuel if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get that Nevada bet on your docket. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Alrighty, Ben, let's wrap up our walkthrough of this ESPN article with the details on Bradley Beal. So we finally got two teams that allegedly the Suns seemed to believe would take Beal. All right. And I believe Gambo has backed up one of these teams, which is the Wizards, taking him back. And the idea of the Wizards getting stuff to take Bradley Beal back, I just love like the smirk on their top executive's face when that call came in. He's like, I bet you would like that. Give me another first round pick and I'll get my guy back and, continue to suck your soul out. But the other one is the Hawks. Now, I'll get to, I think, what happened that is why Beal did not go there. But the other interesting note in here, you mentioned that the Suns seem to have never actually gotten to the point where any of this was solid enough to talk to Brad, which backs up, I think, what we've kind of heard, just more specific here. And the other part is that Miami didn't seem to be on the same exact page during these negotiations. I mean, it's not specifically said in the article like the Hawks and the Wizards talked to the Heat and the Heat, it doesn't go so deep like that, but the phrase conflicting info is in here from the Heat side. So I'll tell you why those deals didn't happen according to the article and what we know now happened on deadline day, but do we even believe that? Like, how much can we even say, like, give the Suns credit that they found these teams? Or is this just like, maybe?
It sounds like the Suns, which I don't know if it was necessarily a bad thing. You were just trying to make a deal happen, but it sounds like James Jones was fibbing a little bit to the Heat, what the Atlanta or what the Wizards would help to make a deal happen. I think Atlanta, probably the Wizards would take Beal back. That one I understand. That one makes sense. Yeah. But it feels like a team like Atlanta was like, yeah, like, sure, we'd be open to taking Beal, but not unless it was for a lot. And that was one of the few teams that said, sure, we'd be open to taking Beal. And the Suns were like, hey, Atlanta might do it. And they were fibbing a little bit to those teams, but that's what I got from it. What did you get from that? It just seemed like James Jones was lying a little bit or fibbing a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know.
Conflicting reports.
Same with the top question. The beginning question when we were like, was it who was the one going around Kleiman? I don't even know to say James Jones on this. Whoever it was, I think that was where they had their fingers crossed. That were, right up at the deadline, if these teams were not able to get other stuff done, that they might circle back to this type of deal. But it all would have been based around the Suns taking back some contracts that those teams didn't want either, right? So that brings us to what really happened and not the he said stuff, which is that instead of the Wizards taking Beal and sending likely, Kuzma and Valanciunas out like they ended up doing, well, they sent those two players out, but in separate trades that they clearly liked more. Kuzma went to the Bucks, Valanciunas went to the Kings. And then on the Hawks side, the same exact thing happened. That team also made a couple cost-cutting moves, Atlanta, on deadline day. They sent DeAndre Hunter to Cleveland, and they sent Bogdanovich to the Clippers. And clearly they just liked that stuff better. But I can at least believe, considering those teams did make deals along these lines, that they might have been willing to do the same thing with Brad.
Yeah.
If those other ones didn't pan out, but obviously the Suns were never the priority for those teams because if nothing else, we know Bradley Beal is not a desirable commodity right now. So I think that kind of brings us to the end and the look forward part of this, which is you add all this up, right? The way they negotiated with Durant, the type of deal that was on the table that they were apparently close to accepting that we just both agreed didn't make sense, the alienating of Beal this whole time, not to mention that he went to the bench during all of this. And then on top of that, the probably, subpar deals that they were going to have to take dating all the way back to allowing themselves to take him on while he still has this no trade clause. All these things kind of add up to they can't keep doing business this way. No. So I just think this is on people's minds. We don't have to go too far down the rabbit hole because we don't know anything about what's going on. But there was a nugget, Ben, in Gerald Bourguet's reporting on this, which is a free article at gophnx.com, which I would also recommend people go check out, which is that James Jones' job is believed to be secure, but he is on the final year of his contract. So those things are telling me different things, right? you get an extension if your job's secure. If you're a lame duck and you're an expiring contract on the executive side, I don't know how safe your job really is. But I also look at that and I say, like we've kind of been low-key debating on the side of this podcast episode, is like, is it even James Jones? Like, do I even care who technically is the general manager of this team when it seems like the owner and the president have a very large say, and mostly, let's say, Ishbia, because obviously he calls the shots. I don't know. They have to just humble themselves. I mean, that's really what this is. They have to just take a step back and humble themselves, right?
It's exactly what I was going to say just a second ago. The Suns have been cornering themselves into just basically a corner, obviously a little redundant there, but the Suns have been backing themselves up into a corner for a few years now. And they've made a couple of moves. Like at first, the first corner was the Chris Paul thing. And you were able to back yourself out of that. And Kevin Durant years ago. And then it was Chris Paul. And then you made a move for whatever, Tyus Jones. And you kept doing all these little moves until you eventually backed yourself in a corner and you have nothing left now. You don't even have your 2031 pick anymore, which we haven't even talked about that. I think it's crazy that they shipped off a pick for Nurkic and didn't just keep their 2031 pick. Like, they have continuously made moves and now they're out of moves. And now they just they've laid their bed. They need to lie in it and just be done with it, man. Like, we have to just go a little bit of time where the Suns can finally accumulate assets, whether that's trading Kevin Durant or waiting for more draft picks to become eligible to be either traded or not traded. They're done. Like, they're done. They're out of moves. They're done with moves. And they need to just be able to sit there and deal with it. And that sucks, but at least they tried. And that's the only thing I'll give them. It's the only grace I'll give them. They did try from years ago. Maybe not at the deadline very hard, but still. Yeah. So,
well, I mean, it sounds like they try. Well, one thing they did at the deadline was also still try. They failed.
Yeah, they did try. What I mean by that is they just didn't get very far. And then the last thing,
I agree with you. Like, in terms of moves, they're done with. I think they're done with. Like, if we use the deadline terminology of like buyers and sellers, the buying phase is over.
Yeah, what I would say as well is loose lips sink ships, and there is clearly a mole in the Suns camp. How did all of these rumors come about and all we ended up with was Cody Martin, who...
Well, that is the number one reason that I think I will believe that a lot of this is not James Jones's fault, because no matter what nits you want to pick in the way that he's built teams in the past, and, the lack of athleticism and the lack of physicality is a staple for him. That's a definite, hole in his philosophy, and everything else, the 2020 draft pick with Jalen Smith and all the stuff you can say, they were not loose-lipped, ever. That's the one reputation James Jones had. He handled his business professionally. He wanted things to be on the up and up and professional and, treat people like people and all that stuff. And when we talk about culture, like, I think that does matter. We always talk about it. We want to point fingers at the players or what's the coach's fault. Did Frank Vogel lose the locker room? Whatever. I think James Jones handling business the way that he did go some part of the way toward the type of culture that this team had from 2018 when he took over up through Ishbia buying the team. And it sounds kind of like, come on, man, business is business. This is the real world. It's like, okay, maybe, but I do think that, like, that type of professionalism, if you listen to anybody who's ever met James Jones, that's the thing they praise him for. So for that to go away, not only, again, tells me James probably isn't the one so much leading the way here, but also I think that that's a big part of why you've seen the finger pointing and the frustrations kind of boil over. I think that's a real problem that they have to solve too, because Miles Bridges last year, it's the same exact song and dance, right? They're going to get him. They're going to get him. They're going to get him. And then it's nothing. It's Royce O'Neal.
It is the same thing from last year. What I will say is look at you. We've been expecting you defending James Jones. Welcome.
Oh, I've defended James Jones plenty.
Well.
You've been doing the show with me for 5 months. I've been doing the
whole show. I don't know about plenty. I don't know about plenty. Plenty would be on this side.
There have been 2 straight off seasons where the entire fan base wanted this dude to lose his job, and I defended him. So I just
Well, I
think
don't
it's
think I was
gotten
there.
harder. I think it's gotten harder to parse now what even his job is, right? What is he doing? What things is he responsible for versus not? The last thing I'll say, because we had a lot to get to, so a longer episode. It's okay. You mentioned trading picks. The Suns have now locked themselves into their 2032 draft pick being frozen. That means that it is at the end of the first round and it cannot be traded until draft night of 2032. That is part of the second apron. That is the final wave of things that goes into effect for second apron teams. That starts now. The fact that the Suns, and it was never going to happen outside of like a Durant trade where they cut a bunch of money, was it locked them in because they were not able to dip under the second apron at the deadline. And you have to be whatever you are on the last day of the regular season is what locks it in. So even if they were to panic and do something on draft night that got them under, that doesn't matter. It's not the first day of the offseason. It's the last day of the regular season. So their pick is frozen. We will not be talking about the 2032 pick at all, even though they technically have not traded it yet because it's not available to them. The league has said, no, that's your punishment. So it's the last picks that they have from all these swaps and everything else that they've done and their players, and that's it.
Hell yeah.
Fun stuff, right?
Sorry, man. All I can do is laugh sometimes. Like I just it sucks that we're here, man. It sucks that we're here, but I will continue to say that I do believe in Ishbia enough and James Jones to an extent that I don't think this is going to be a tenured, horrible, terrible time as a Suns fan. I think it'll be a lot quicker than some people think. So,
all right, that'll wrap us up. One more episode for you tomorrow before Suns Grizzlies on Tuesday night. Keep it right here. Hit follow, subscribe, become an everydayer if you have not already, and we will talk to you tomorrow.